Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was April 28th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Montcada Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. If you look at the registers of letters from Joan and Violante for April 28th, the day seems to be quite normal, and perhaps it was. We find out later that the evening of Sunday, April 28th, was anything but normal, because the king, Joan, he almost died. And we find that out in a letter that Violante writes on April 30th and on the subsequent days, written by Violante to pretty much, it's the people she's writing to the most about this, interestingly, are the ambassadors of the Crown of Aragon in Avignon, in the papal court. And I'm not quite sure why they're the ones that get the full story and nobody else does. But that's what she decided to do. I'm not exactly sure why it was the ambassadors in Avignon that were the ones that needed the full story, and that she wasn't writing the full story to others that she had been a little bit more personal with, such as in the letters to her father and mother. But maybe we'll figure that out a little bit later. For now, what's important to understand is that on April 30th, we get the blow-by-blow account of what happened on the evening of April 28th. And it's clear that everything was normal, it seems, until Vespers. Vespers is the name for the evening prayer. So it's typically recited at sunset. And so until sunset on April 28th, there seems to be nothing alarming or urgent in the way that Violante tells the story. Although what remains unclear is how much of Joan's lingering illness was leaving him diminished in just sort of the day-to-day, well, this is like his normal. So is it the case that he spends most of his time in the days spanning January until now, at the end of April, mostly incapacitated but conscious? What's his normal in these days? Because tomorrow's document will see that Violante says that he's been ill for a long time, which actually is the opposite of what she's been writing to other people during the period that any reasonable person would say a long time before April 28th. So in the couple weeks approaching April 28th, Violante is writing to all these people. As we've seen, he's convalescing. He's going to be perfectly well so soon, in a very brief amount of time. He's going to be fine. And now we're going to be seeing a different story coming from Violante. And please don't take away from this that Violante is just a big old liar or some kind of, delusional person. She's doing this because it is crucial for the success of a monarch that they are seen as strong and healthy. The scholar Ernst Kantorowicz has established this in the scholarship in his book, The King's Two Bodies, that in the Middle Ages, it was a taken for granted stance. It was a taken for granted mindset that the health of the king was like a one-to-one relationship with the health of the state. And that if you had a weak king in body, then the state would also be considered weak. And so everybody knows this at the time, and therefore it is essential that Violante is putting out there the message that there's nothing wrong with Joan. And of course, Joan would want to put out that message himself too. And so, but it's interesting because Violante is like the number one communicator about Joan's health, and he is not really talking about his own health all that much. I mean, that's going to kind of change a little bit, at least in the moment where we see this heightened danger in these couple days here. So we'll see that tomorrow. But in terms of the documents that are in the record for the daytime of Sunday, April 28th, 1387, there is nothing that seems wrong. It seems like just another day. And today's document is from Joan's Secret Seal Register, and it is the latest in an episode that has been going on for quite a while that we haven't really talked about hardly at all in the podcast. And, well, the specifics of it we haven't talked about, but the topic is piracy. Pirates. I think pirates have come up only once before on the podcast, and pirates are so exciting. And so it's really weird that we've got this document popping up about piracy right in the middle of this intense moment of trying to figure out what was going on with Joan's health, and he almost dies. But on this day, April 28th, this day that probably when he was thinking about this topic of this pirate that we're going to talk about, he had no idea that in the evening he would fall off a cliff in terms of his health, metaphorically speaking. There is also the possibility, I do not consider it all that likely, but there is the possibility that he is not actually involved in the writing of this document, and that the Chancery staff and his court officials have made this document in his name. I don't know, because it just seems like this one, there's nothing super personal about it, but the decision that's made in it seems to be one that Joan might have been involved in, because it involves Luchino Scarampi and moving Luchino Scarampi from Avignon to someplace else, or maybe this issue has somehow come to Avignon, but Scarampi is involved, and whenever we see Scarampi involved, it's usually handled with Joan and Violante directly telling Scarampi to do something or involving Scarampi in something. So the fact that it's this high up ambassador financier person, Luchino Scarampi, that makes me think that Joan was involved in this document. Let's talk about the document. There's so much to say because there's such a backstory, and there's also an AI usage angle to it. All right. The addressee of this letter is listed below the text block. The addressee lines read Fuit Missa, and then comiti is crossed out because the scribe decided that instead of going right to the title of the person, they would put in their name. And so we get comiti at the end. So if we skip the part that's crossed out, it reads Fuit Missa Guillermo Raymundo de Montcada Comiti de Gosca. All right. Who was this person? I got to tell you, I really pulled out all the stops to figure out who this was. I was so close to giving up. I had been working on it for about an hour, trying to figure out who this Guillermo Raymundo was. And one of the problems is that there was a Guillermo Ramon de Montcada who is basically taking up all of the Google search results. And that person is not this Guillermo Raymundo, because the person who comes up when you search Google for Guillermo Raymundo de Montcada is the first of the Guillermo Raymundos who were in the House of Montcada, and that person is from the early or mid 13th century. So that's not the same person, and so basically the Google search results are all messed up when you just try to Google this person. And then I started to think, well, maybe it's not Montcada. Maybe what I'm seeing on the second line of the addressee information is something else. Because, well, the T, it could be a T. Those C's could be T's. And in fact, look at that C that happens right before the H. It is just so difficult to admit that that is the letter C. But, well, maybe it's not. But usually when you have an H coming right after, it's a CH. And so I was really just getting torn up about this. The register that we're looking at today was sent through my OpenClaw pipeline. And the result of that automated text recognition and translation had Claude concluding that this was Montcada, that this was some kind of variation on Montcada. And in the end, that turned out to be correct. But then Claude said that this was the Count of Gociano. So Claude looked at, and look at this. I mean, what was happening with this scribe where they have this letter S that they're just like, bleh. Like, really, if you look at this letter S, it's like they were agitated as they wrote it. Maybe this is an indication of some kind of trouble brewing with Joan's health. I don't think so. I mean, we sometimes see these weird sort of flourishes, but that is a very unusual movement of the ink on the paper for that S, Gosca. And so it looks like a C, and guess what? It turned out to be the letter T. Isn't that something, right? So, oh gosh, it turned out to be the letter T, and but I don't blame Claude for reading that as a C. So what Claude got out of that was Gosca, and then from there surmised that it was the Count of Gociano. Gociano is a place, it's in Sardinia. So I can see why Claude made that association, that, okay, we've got some kind of Catalan noble person, and this is a place that's got those letters, and Sardinia was under the tutelage of the Crown of Aragon, so okay, I get it. But if you look at a map of Sardinia and you look at where that place is, it's like smack in the middle. It's like some mountain. And then if you read about it, it just doesn't seem all that plausible that somebody would be named the Count of Goseiano as part of some kind of association with the House of Montcada. It doesn't seem to match up because that particular location in Sardinia doesn't seem to have enough prestige associated with it. So I was getting pretty stuck just working from Google and trying to figure out any of these leads from Claude. So I was about to give up. And I was also just Googling all these variations of Guillermo Raymundo with the date and trying to just find anything. I decided to go to Hieronymo Zorita, thinking, well, Hieronymo Zorita chronicled a lot, and maybe he just so happened to talk about the Count of Montcada at some point, and so I just gave it a try. I just did a Control F find in the digital version of Hieronymo Zorita's Anales de la Corona de Aragon, and lo and behold, I got a result. So in Book 10, Chapter 41, Zorita wrote about this episode that took place and Zorita situates it in time according to the phrase around the time of the death of King Per the Ceremonious. So the Count of Montcada, who is actually listed in there as Guillermo Raymundo, he is in Zorita's chronicle for an event that happened around the time of the death of Per the Ceremonious. Now, it got weird, because what was that event? What Zorita describes is that this Guillermo Raymundo, he had captured a Genoese merchant ship that had come from Beirut, and it was like loaded with treasure. So this was an act of piracy, and although the Crown of Aragon and Genoa were not in a hostile state, they weren't in a state of war against each other at the time, it was still the case that they had enough enmity and antagonism that someone like this guy, Guillermo Raymundo, the Count of Montcada, felt like he could steal a bunch of Genoese stuff. And that seems to have taken place in 1386. Not sure when in 1386. And the situation is still ongoing, where the Genoese are saying, this is an act of piracy, we need our stuff back. Perhaps they're bringing this up in Avignon. That would make sense to have the Lucino Scarampi connection there, but I didn't see anything about that at all. So then I was wondering, okay, where can I find out more information about this incident that Zorita has described? And so I Googled and nothing was coming up. I Googled Beirut, Genoa, and then Guillermo Raymundo. Nothing was coming up. Did a bunch of different Google searches. So then I went to Claude and I said to Claude, hey, I am researching this incident that Hieronymo Zorita wrote about in his chronicle, in which Guillermo Raymundo, Count of Montcada, has taken a Genoese vessel that had come from Beirut. And I asked Claude to just search, try to find anything in the secondary literature. And Claude found something. Found an article from one of my favorite writers, favorite Catalan writers on the history of the Crown of Aragon from this time, Maria Teresa Ferrer y Mayol. There was an article that she wrote in 1966. 1966. And it was in Italian. An article in Italian. And I'm getting so excited because I'm just really astonished at the fact that Claude was able to do this. But the article is available for free. And so it must have been in Claude's training set, or maybe Claude is now able to just do some internet searching. But not only did Claude identify that this article was one that talked about this incident, but he, oh guys, I used he for Claude. A large language model Claude was able to find and tell me that in this article from 1966, written by Ferrer y Mayol, that Zorita had been cited in a footnote in regard to this incident. The article is about the treaty between the Crown of Aragon and Genoa in 1390, which was an update to a treaty that had been passed in 1386. And the incident that is discussed in this letter, this document from today, is mentioned in those treaty negotiations because this had really ticked off the Genoese. I think this was like a really valuable load of merchandise that was on this boat because the Genoese specify the damages that had occurred as a result of the piracy of Guillermo Raymundo. All right, in this article, Ferrer y Mayol says that Guillermo Raymundo, the Count of Montcada, was also the Count of Agosto. Agosto. That matches what we see in the addressee line, the second line of the addressee information in today's document. It's Gosta. Gosta. And I don't know where Ferrer y Mayol found that information, but apparently this same guy, this same pirate who took this Genoese ship in an act of piracy, he had done this thing that he's quite famous for. It's like really amazing. He had taken Maria of Sicily and had kidnapped her from Sicily and brought her to the Crown of Aragon so that she could marry the son of Marti. Wow. So basically, Marti the Younger is married into this royal line of Sicily as a result of this Catalan pirate being able to, and she actually I think was a little bit frightened for her situation in Sicily because it was like there were these oligarchs that were fighting for political control. It was kind of dangerous for her anyway, so it's possible she might have been happy to have been transported. I mean, Ferrer y Mayol says she was kidnapped, so I'm just going to kind of go with that. But anyway, that was earlier in the 1380s. So at this point, Guillermo Raymundo, he is quite the dude. He is quite the pirate. And he just captures this Genoese ship in 1386. The controversy is ongoing. And now, on April 28th, 1387, we see that Lucino Scorampi, who's identified as a portador in line 2 of this letter, is being sent with some, I think, additional documents, and that this is like a little cover letter. And he's being sent to Guillermo Raymundo the Count of Montcada, the Count of Agosto, in order to do something, in order to have some kind of like negotiation, like maybe Scarampi is saying, look, you took this stuff illegally, and you just are going to have to give it back. And Guillermo Raymundo is going to probably say, no. Turns out, in the later years, it is Scarampi's relative, possibly brother, named Bartolomeo Scarampi, who is the representative for the Genoese as they are seeking restitution for this lost cargo. And we actually have an amount. It's something like 27,000 florins. This is all in the article, that Italian language article by Ferrer y Mayol, which I'll link to in the notes for today's episode. So Scarampi is maybe brought into this because his relative, I don't know if it's his brother, cousin, uncle, Bartolomeo Scarampi, is high up in the representation of the Genoese interests for this incident. One last thing I'm going to say about Scarampi is that we've got a very unusual way of referring to him in his first name at the end of line 1 of today's document, Loys, which is Luis. So he's being called Luis Escarampo, and I'm pretty sure that's Lucchino, same person. I just wanted to flag that because it stands out as very unusual, because he's hardly ever referred to as Luis. He's almost always referred to as Luqui or Lucchino, something like that. One last thing that I figured out in this letter. Look at the very end of line 2. En les parts de, and then line 3 has the word domas. I was really stumped by this domas. It doesn't really come up in my medieval Catalan glossary. I was like, is this like some form of like home? The D itself was unusually formed. It doesn't really look like the capital D in, like, say, the dating line that begins the second to last line of this document, Dada N. Does not look like that capital D. It also doesn't really look too much like the lowercase d that's large-sized on the last line of the text block, where we have de for of April, d'abril. So I was wondering if that was an S. So I was searching around for somas. I went to the Diccionari Català Valencia Balear and put in somas, and nothing came up. And then I put in domas, D-O-M-A-S. Turns out that is the first definition, is that it's a place name for Damascus. So Zorita had some kind of source that said the Genoese ship was from Beirut. And here we've got Joan writing that it's from Damascus. Maybe these place names were interchangeable as far as Joan knew. Maybe all the stuff from Damascus, it kind of gets shipped out of Beirut. So to say Damascus means Beirut. Not sure. But it's very clear that based on the Domas, the word Domas, which has got to refer to Damascus, and you can see it's a larger size D to indicate that it's a proper noun, and the fact that we've got Guillermo Raymundo de Montcada in there, we know that we've got a match for the person that was written about by Zorita, and then that's in the early modern era, right? Zorita was writing in the late 1500s, and then also written about by Maria Teresa Ferrer y Mayol in 1966. So this was a real achievement in terms of leveraging all of my search skills and the resources that I have. And it's only possible because of full text searching of Zorita, and also because of the enhanced web searching capabilities of Claude. Not to mention my own paleographic knowledge to understand that this was not talking about Gociano in Sardinia, but instead had to be someplace else. Woo! So everything is being leveraged, all the skills, all the technology, all the know-how. This document was one that was a lot of fun to puzzle through. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt cara companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the dramatic next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.